All right, welcome to BARC's October Ecology Club on rethinking public lands and national forests. BARC's Ecology Club is a monthly gathering on the second Wednesday of each month to discuss a theme or topic that pertains to BARC's work and to develop a deeper appreciation and understanding of the region's ecology. BARC's mission is to transform Mount Hood National Forest into a place where natural processes prevail, where wildlife thrives, and where local communities have a social, cultural, and economic investment in its restoration and preservation. Since 1999, BARC has organized people from communities around Mount Hood National Forest to keep watch over the ecological conditions of the forest and the actions of the federal agency tasked with managing these public lands, the Forest Service. You can find more information at BARC's website at www.barc-out.org or find BARC on Facebook or Instagram at BARC for Mount Hood. My name is Misha Van Eaton. I work as BARC's Forest Watch Assistant, and I am helping to moderate the event tonight. Tonight, we're lucky to have Mia Pizzano, a longtime volunteer, leading and facilitating tonight's learnings and discussions. Before Mia gets started, I would like you all to participate in BARC's land acknowledgement practice. This is a practice that BARC has developed for all of our events. It has 3 parts: an accountability statement, a journaling practice, and a moment of silent contemplation. Tonight, I'll be reading the accountability statement and lead a minute of the silent contemplation, as there's going to be a lot of prompts and opportunities for discussion and reflection on acknowledgement and taking action throughout the presentation tonight. So I'll begin with BARC's accountability statement. As an organization founded by white people in the lineage of settler-colonial environmentalism, BARC understands that conservation work is embedded in the white supremacist legacy of colonization, of land theft, cultural erasure and genocide, and the systemic use of law to suppress Native sovereignty over their homelands. We understand that BARC's dedication to protecting the stolen lands, now referred to as the public lands of Mount Hood National Forest, carries with it this paradox which continues to be ignored by most conservation groups and which continues to harm Indigenous people. In our advocacy and policy work, BARC's interactions with federal agencies often comply with the authority assumed by the US federal government. This authority was assumed through the legalized displacement and genocide of Indigenous people and cultures, including through the legislative creation of public lands. These crimes and injustices have not been reconciled nor rectified. Today, all non-Native people have the privilege of primary access to these public lands as a direct result of this strategy of legalized supremacy. BARC recognizes that conservation organizations like ours are complicitly participating in the ongoing displacement of Native people and culture each time settlers claim the benefits of access to this land, and by engaging the paradox of protecting stolen land. We are working to change the vision, mission, and strategies of our organization. BARC affirms that these are the rightful homelands of the Multnomah, Molalla, Kalapuya, Chinook, Clackamas, Tenino, Wasco, Wishram, Paiute, and the many other Native people who live here and who have always lived here, who have always belonged to and cared for this land, and whose bold resistance to colonial oppression should guide us all. Now, I would like to respectfully invite any Native people here today to have a few minutes to speak freely. If you would like to speak, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or type into the chat. BARC is committing to the work necessary to repair relationships between settler and Indigenous people and between all non-Indigenous people in the land. Acknowledgement is just the necessary first step in this revolutionary cultural work. Please join me in a moment of respectful silence and contemplation and humility in honor of the original people here tonight, across this continent, in the past, present, and the future. Thank you all for supporting this important practice and learning. It's important that we continue to practice acknowledgement through action in all areas of our lives. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mia.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you for the introduction and for all of your tech work here. My name is Mia Pizzano. I use she and her pronouns, and I really appreciate everyone who's here tonight. I am a non-Indigenous person living on stolen land, which is to say, I am an occupier, I am a colonizer. My individual identity has been centered around loving nature, loving forests and mountains and wild places, and advocating for the protection of living landscapes from industrial exploitation. In the last several years, I've been awakened to the ways that my nature-loving identity is part of a white supremacist environmental narrative about the purity of nature. This narrative, I've come to understand, is inextricable from the erasure of Native authority and the disruption of Indigenous land ownership and management by the federal government. As uncomfortable as this awakening has been for me, it's necessary for me to dig into it in search of understanding that can bring me closer to integrity in my words and in my actions, to move beyond being a nature-loving forest advocate and into the broader, more profound work of environmental justice. In the process of unpacking and examining the beliefs and narratives that I carry about nature and my relationship with nature, and very specifically about forest management, I've been spending time with some of the work of the Confluence Project. I'll tell you a little bit about the Confluence Project. On their website, their introduction says, Confluence connects you to the history, living cultures, and ecology of the Columbia River system through Indigenous voices. We are a community-supported nonprofit that works through 6 art landscapes, educational programs, and public gatherings in collaboration with Northwest tribes, communities, and the celebrated artist Maya Lin. Tonight in this Ecology Club, I'm going to use this opportunity to amplify and elevate these voices of Indigenous people who have always lived here in relationship with this land. Together, we're going to watch a selection of videos and video interviews produced by the Confluence Project with Native people of the Columbia River. In these interviews, these elders talk about their ongoing cultural, personal, and historical relationships with this land, water, and communities of living beings. I've selected these videos because of the ways that they challenge various aspects of the colonialist narratives of public land, national forests, wilderness, and mainstream environmentalism. Before we begin watching, I'm going to have all of us spend 5 minutes doing individual journaling in response to a set of open-ended questions. These responses that we write are for ourselves. We won't share them with the group. You won't have answers to all the questions. It's not a test. It's not public writing. The purpose of this activity is to frame our thinking. And I will read these aloud. You can start writing at any time. Misha's also going to put these prompt questions into the chat. And after I've finished reading, I'll start a timer for 5 minutes. What is wilderness? What values do you associate with wilderness? Who is the public? What does it mean for land to be owned by the public? How do national forests exist? Why do they exist? Who gets to have what kinds of relationships with places designated as public lands and national forests? How are decisions made and carried out about actions taken on public land? What rights and responsibilities do members of the public have with public lands? As residents of a nation, what relationship do we have with national forests? I'm starting our timer. So go ahead and wrap up your writing. And in just a minute, we'll start watching the first videos. We're going to watch 3 sets of short videos with breakout room discussions after the first 2 sets. So we'll watch a set of videos, have a breakout room discussion, watch another set, have another breakout. And then after the final video, we'll have another journaling and reflection session. So this first set of 3 videos are from the Confluence series, Stories from the River. And they build the context of Native peoples' historical and ongoing experiences and relationships with the land and the river. As we watch these first 3 videos, I want you to stay present with this idea we've been taught that public lands belong equally to all the citizens of the nation, right? That's the idea that we're taught. And I want you to keep that idea in mind. And hold in mind the idea that the federal government is the legitimate authority over these lands and waters. So keep those in mind while we watch these first 3 videos.
It snows and it rains, and the water falls upon those sacred sites, places where people have prayed. That ground where you're sitting has been touched. That rain and snow washes that ground, and it goes down, becomes a creek, a stream, a river, and eventually goes into the Columbia River. And so you have the water that washed 1,000 places congregate together here. You have a place out here that has 100,000 prayers flowing through it for centuries. How can that water not be sacred?
There's a lot of history about the river, and a lot of it is spiritual in the way the people believed and followed in a spiritual way of respecting the Waukanish and the river and the land itself and each other. And today we're still one people. But a lot of them say that there's different names, like the Warner Springs and the Acknowledgement. But you go way back in the history, you'll see that they were one. And that's what I want to do, is bring them back together as one.
It's not up to somebody else to come in and say, oh, I know what you need, you know, you should have this, you know, I know why you don't have this, you know, I know why, you know, you don't try hard enough, you make bad choices, you know what you need to do and you just don't want to do it, you know. Well, you don't approach people that way. The people on a river have to know that the people that they live next to, they can trust. You know, that the county sheriff and state police are dealing with the tribal government. There's a government relationship, and so that they can have some peace and contentment.
Tribal sovereignty is covered. It's right in the Constitution. When right midway down the page, only Congress shall have the power to treat with the Indian tribes. That sets the stage. So that means that when the tribes talk about a government-to-government relationship, it means with the federal government.
What really makes me happy is that there are young people now going back to the Longhouse. They want to learn to dig the ceremonial gathering. They want to learn how to obtain the food, how to identify it, find location places, you know. You have to know all of that.
You know, I think it's important that the people in the world see the Native people being treated with respect and dignity, and their voice is being heard, and people care about them.
In our longhouse ceremonies, a strong reverence for water, salmon, game, roots, and berries. These are the first foods. The Creator gave us these first foods with the understanding that if we took care of them, they would take care of us. The tribes made sure that those first foods were protected. So that key language in our treaties is the right to fish and hunt at all usual and accustomed fishing places, as well as gathering roots and berries. That's in our treaty. So the tribes are protecting their first rights. So these are rights that the tribes always had. They weren't granted to the tribes, they reserved those rights in the treaties. It has taken a long time because the tribes have had to fight for their rights ever since those treaties were signed in 1855. But those rights are real. It's a property right that's been recognized by the Supreme Court.
Our treaty rights is very important, and we have to keep teaching our generations so they can respect and know their rules and regulations. That way, everyone will have a healthy future.
My other hope is that they care about our Treaty of 1855, because we're in a time where it could get taken away. Our sovereignty is being threatened. When the fish are gone, we're gone. Literally, it's water is life.
And I don't think most white people understand that when the government went through the treaty process, they said, okay, you people, you Cayuses, Umatillas, Walla Wallas, and other Indians living in Southeast Washington and Northeast Oregon are now this confederated tribes. And what you own as a tribe. And we're extinguishing all your ownership of your fishing sites on the river. We're extinguishing, it's not in the treaty language, but this is what they did by that treaty. They extinguished the individual property rights of all of our campsites in the hunting grounds, all of our campsites in the berry picking fields, all of our digging sites and all of our scaffolds. Those were no longer individually owned by families. They became collective ownership. So they extinguished that kind of infrastructure in our families, and then took the children away and put them in boarding schools where they had a loss of cultural transmission for a few years. And then in the 50s, through relocation and termination, continued to try to break down the fabric of our social structure. And now we're trying to do things to put it back together.
In 1954 was then the Western Termination Act, and the reservation was closed, and any lands that were remaining were sold off. So the reservation resulted in a lot of the families moving away from the Grand Ronde area. They needed to work and things like that, and there was also a relocation program at that point to try to get the native people off the reservations and relocate them, like to Portland and San Francisco and Denver, Seattle. So a lot of the people kind of moved away from there at that point in time. And then we were able to gain restoration in 1983. And so since that time, the tribe's been pretty much rebuilding since that period of time.
When we signed the treaty, we were promised that there would always be fish in the water. We were fortunate to have the Acknowledgement Nation Tribal School come up for a tour. And that was one of my key points to them, is that this is your facility. It's the Acknowledgement Nation.
When Isaac Stevens came down and negotiated, and some of our people had it backwards, and they were saying, the government asked, what can I give you? I can give you land, I can give you fishing rights, I can give you all of these rights. And our people said, we already had those rights, and this is our homeland.
Our feasts start with water. Then the first foods is salmon, then deer, then roots and berries, and back to water again. And that's kind of been one of our formulas that we've had, that you take care of these gifts from the Creator, and they'll take care of you.
They would come home with dried fish, dried deer meat, all kinds of roots and berries. And they would have all this food, and even though they had all this food, they don't take in people or relatives who didn't have a home, and they lived on this way all their lives, and it was beautiful.
We had an amazing system of clouds and rain. And I think we understood every kind of water there was in our universe, whether it flowed on the ground or whether it came from the sky. And we always had a way to deal with that as a life process. So we understood every molecule as it came from the sky, and we knew how to live in it.
And there was a place called Mccoy Creek. It's all dried up now. Great big stream, beautiful holes for fish where the trees used to fall into the creek bottom, and it would dam it up and these big pools would form, which was what we used to have on Umatilla on my reservation. Now they keep the river all cleared out of all debris, and you don't find those pools anymore. I don't know what fishing's like. I don't fish anymore. And I started dying out fishing when I was still on the reservation, because those pools were just no longer there. But that Mccoy Creek, man, there were trout. You know, a trout a foot long in those creeks were pretty good fish. Fish all day long. We'd eat fish every day.
Water is the giver of life. If we don't have any water, we have no life. We need it to cleanse the land, to, quench the land's thirst, because the land's thirsty too. It's hard to put it into words, my love for this place. This is where all of my old people are buried. And when my time on this world ends, that's where I want to be. Because the sound, even though the roar of the river, the free flowing has been limited, but it's still my homeland.
Those connections, that kind of really intimate connection to your place, I think really changes how you feel about it. And, we're compelled to have people understanding it in that way or looking at our place that way because we really do believe they're going to treat it differently. I think that has to be the case. And, we want people to even have a sense of ownership in it, even though that's our stories. I mean, it's the stories from the place. And it used to be that where you were from is who you are. Nowadays, there's all kinds of different ways to define who you are, where, what you are. But the reality is for 10,000 years around here, what you were or who you were was about where you were born and raised. It didn't have nearly as much to do with your blood. It was the other. And so, in that case, these people that are here and going to be here, we need them to feel that kind of, connection to our home and their home.
We have to teach people to slow down and stop and think about it. Caring for something, caring for yourself, caring about your elders and your children and everything around you, all that lives and everything, caring about it. I care about it. Maybe I can share that with you and maybe you learn about what I care about and why I care about it. And maybe you take that and have some insight and put that into the fabric of your life, that you can take it. And maybe that there are others that will witness this and take that and put it into their life and have an insight and understanding of what it's like to be alive, to care about something. And they can teach themselves and their children and their grandchildren that they too can do this.
Well, hello again, and welcome to everyone who joined us during those videos. I never get tired of watching those. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms. We'll probably have about four or so people in each breakout room. So each person will get to speak for about a minute. And let's talk in our breakout room groups about what felt relevant to you, to your role as an environmental activist. I'm just guessing that most of us here define ourselves as an environmental activist in some way. And so in those first three videos, what spoke to your role as an environmental activist? Welcome back, everyone. That was that was like the best breakout group conversation I've ever had. That was really great. So we're going to watch another set of videos. There are 6, and these are really short, like 1 to 3 minutes. And in these 6, 3 Native elders speak about specific experiences and connections. And you'll notice some repetition. Some of the sections were excerpted in the first set of videos, so there will be some repetitions. One theme throughout these next 6 videos is the millennia of indigenous land management and how that has been disrupted through occupation, colonization, and industrialization. I want you to listen for insights on how mainstream white-dominated environmentalism and mainstream white outdoor recreation values contribute to the ongoing continuous disruption of indigenous land management. That was kind of a mouthful. I'm just going to say it again. While we're watching these next 6 videos, listen for insights that you can connect with on how mainstream white-dominated environmentalism and mainstream outdoor recreation values contribute to ongoing disruption of indigenous land management. So here we go in our next video set.
Well, just travelers going through it. I think it's pretty much what they thought of them when they were just venturing through. You know, that they didn't have much. They didn't. You know, they were not a trade group of. You know, like they weren't carrying a lot of things to trade. They just had a few things. Pretty much just kind of made up things. You know, like, oh hey, we got an extra one of these. Hey, you want to trade for that? You know, you know, the people are going, we already have one of those. Thank you. You know, but, you know, it's just, but they were explaining, they tried to explain. It's hard to understand that. I mean, it's like if a flying saucer landed here and somebody got out and they had a map, they're looking around, you know, like, oh, where's this galaxy at? You know where we could find this galaxy? And going like, I don't know. Well, we just bought this whole half of the universe, and we're trying to find this galaxy and this star, you know, group right here. You know, we bought all of that. We own it now. We own this. What's this place called? This planet here. We own this place too. You know. And they're like, yeah, right. Sure you did. Yeah. You bought this planet. You know, from who? I never got payment for it. Did you get payment for it? Yeah. Did you negotiate the sale? I don't know what you're talking about. When the salmon left, when the lake gave out from the mountains fighting, and the water drained out, the salmon left with it, and the people got Spiliai to come and take 5 people and go look for the salmon. And they went through this whole process, enduring all this suffering, loss and everything, and help from others to find the salmon. And the salmon asked them to make an agreement if they come back. The Spiliai said, those people there need you. They love you. You have to come back. He said, we'll come back because it's a great and wonderful thing to be needed and loved. You know, we all want to be needed and loved. Spiliai told the salmon that the people here needed them and loved them. So they agreed to come back. If they're treated with honor and respect and used in a good way, they will always come back. And it's up to us to keep that word. The salmon keep theirs. They keep struggling, fighting to come back, no matter what we do to the environment to destroy their habitat and everything. They keep struggling to come back and keep their word. You know, they die out there in the river because the water's too hot, but they're trying to keep their word. We have to keep ours. The salmon will show you what it means to keep their word every season they come back. Yet you have people out there running around. There's no instance, of honesty and sincerity and people actually keeping their word anymore. Those days are gone. Maybe they never happened. You go down to the river and you see it happening every year. How is that not sacred? You know, the people see it, but they don't understand it. We write a treaty, we make an agreement, and that agreement gets broken. You know, we didn't keep our word, so what? Those days are gone, they're past. Who cares? You know, you go down the river and you see the word being kept every year. So, hey, wait a minute. You know, you're telling me that those agreements and everything are gone, they're past, we move on? Maybe what you're telling me is that it's your time to pass and time for you to move on. I see the word being kept, between the people, Spiliai, and the salmon. That word is being kept. And it's up for us to keep that word that we fulfill our part of the agreement. You're going to have to open his ears. You're going to have to hear. And when you get rid of all this other stuff and your ears open up to the spiritual, it's not listening to the wind or dogs or cars or sirens or alarm clocks and television. It's a vast openness. And you have this place where you go to do that. And almost all people in this world have a mountain, a place where they can go and sit and pray, maybe 2 or 3 days, nonstop, all over the world, all the peoples. You know, not just the Columbia River people, but all the people. All the way up to Canada, all the way down to Wyoming. It snows and it rains, and the water falls upon those sacred sites, places where people have prayed, and God has come and communed with the person. God has touched that person. That ground where you're sitting has been touched. That rain and snow washes that ground, and it goes down, becomes a creek, a stream, a river, and eventually goes into the Columbia River. And so you have the water that washed 1,000 places congregate together here. You have a place out here that has 100,000 prayers flowing through it for centuries. How can that water not be sacred? You go out there and you can see it, you can feel it, the sacredness. And there's all that live in there, you know. And the salmon that travel through there come back and bring us food, sustenance, keep their promise.
what we experience now on the river sometimes is hard. And I don't think most white people understand that when the government went through the treaty process, they said, okay, you people, you Cayuses, Umatillas, Walla Wallas, and other Indians living in Southeast Washington and Northeast Oregon are now this confederated tribes. And what you own as a tribe. And we're extinguishing all your ownership of your fishing sites on the river. We're extinguishing, it's not in the treaty language, but this is what they did by that treaty. They extinguished the individual property rights of all of our campsites in the hunting grounds, all of our campsites in the berry picking fields, all of our digging sites, and all of our scaffolds. Those were no longer individually owned by families. They became collective ownership. So they extinguished that kind of structure, infrastructure in our families, and then took the children away and put them in boarding schools where they had a loss of cultural transmission for a few years. And then in the 50s, through relocation and termination, continued to try to break down the fabric of our social structure. And now we're trying to do things to put it back together. And I don't know that we'll ever be whole cloth. We may look different, we may sound different, but we'll still be here. Where every tributary meets the Columbia River at the confluences with the Columbia, there were typically winter villages. Our people on the Columbia canyons, where they met, where the tributary met the Columbia, it was a canyon typically. Juniper Canyon, where it comes into the Columbia, Umatilla, Willow Creek, all the way down the river. Waterways, the Deschutes, the John Day, come through canyons to the Columbia. And those canyons were where we lived, where we were out of the wind and where it was a little bit warmer in the winter, where there was fresh water for horses and people, and where we could survive on our foods that we'd gathered from spring till fall. So that seasonal lifestyle put us in contact with all of our relatives and our neighboring tribes at different times of the year at different locations. So our knowledge of the Columbia River Plateau was a collective communal knowledge from everyone's travels. When they went east, west, north, and south, when we went east, west, north, and south, when we gathered by the hordes at the Celilo Falls region, people gathered there historically before contact with white people by the thousands when the fish ran. And the pre-dam Columbia River estimates for most scientists for salmon were annually 1 million to 2.5 million, at the most 5 million. But Oregon State University scientists who've used the Lewis and Clark journals to extrapolate and reapply that data suggest that the pre-dam Columbia River fishery was 15 to 20 million fish. So when our oral histories say that you could cross the river on the backs of fish, and when my mother describes the times of low water in the river, when you could cross the river on horseback or on foot through the islands and through the rocks and in low water, or swimming horses across, that it was, you take that low river water level or elevation and combine that with that many millions of fish coming back up the river, swimming all the way to Canada, to the origin of the river, you can easily see that the oral histories were true, that they did cross the river on the backs of salmon in spawning season in October, the same time of year Lewis and Clark arrived, and didn't understand anadromous fish and wondered why the fish were dying and thought they might be poisoned or something. So these confluences were home sites. These places on the river were occupied for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And they were along the river that had the richest salmon fishery in the West. So Celilo was the Wall Street of the West. Anything that could be in trade in the West, Spanish helmets, might be obtained at any given time if it was in the network at Celilo. And so it's the Columbia River's history before dams is a much richer, fuller reflection of our people's food sources and lifeways and songs and medical and medicinal and spiritual practices. All of that was very much alive on the Columbia River.
People do not understand the Indian understanding of care of the land they stood on, and they built houses on, and they lived on, and they raised their children on, and their grandchildren's children. They did not understand that we were not passive. I mentioned the Creator gave us this and said, work with me. We did. We worked with the Creator. We helped manage lands that would be abundant, and we understood what caused that. So yes, we managed land. We harvested, as I mentioned, just to the right amount, and we took care of the land so that it did not build up into unmanageable strength. So we pushed back when needed, and we managed as we needed. We were not passive people. We were not people without knowledge. Now we have the sciences that tell us what we're supposed to do and when we're supposed to do it, and then we have some people who sue other people to stop that process. The Indian people were not like that. We understood how to take care of land. And yes, we were excellent managers, which was why this land was so appealing to the new people. It was great land. It had not run wild. It was not a jungle. We had trails, we had passages, we had prairies that we used for our needs, of the kind of roots and the berries and the tubers that were needed for our people to the right amount. Other people saw huge development. You know, you've got to build it where we had landings, where we had our canoes come in. They saw that, well, this is where we'll build a port, and we'll have bigger ships coming in, and we'll have more commerce, and we'll have more trading power. So they took everything, I think, that we understood how to do and magnified it maybe 1,000,000 times into where they'd lost contact with the land, the resource. They built it up, the trading power, to almost be destructive. They nearly drove a lot of our animals into extinction before finally waking up to conservation values. And of course, they almost drove us into extinction because we could survive anything except the bugs they brought in.
Hello again, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to do another session of breakout rooms, and our questions this time are: what grabbed you the most in these videos, and what part was the most personally relevant? And I know that there were a lot that we watched. I'll just kind of remind you, we started with 3 videos by Bill Yallop Jr. The first, where he talked about Lewis and Clark like aliens claiming the planet. the second, where he talked about salmon, showing you what it means to keep your word. And his third, the water that washed 1,000 places. And then we saw Bobby Connor talking about treaty impacts and the water's so low, people could walk across the river on the backs of fish. And the final video with Tana Egdahl saying we were excellent land managers. And then our breakout room questions are, what grabbed you the most and what part was the most personally relevant? So we'll have a few minutes in our breakout rooms and maybe stretch your legs, and then we'll be back here in a few minutes. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Looks like we might have had some people sign out. That was another really great breakout conversation. And we're going to watch one more video. This is the longest one. And again, there's a little bit of repetition in it. So this final video, it builds on all the issues from the previous videos. And it ends with a reflection question that's relevant and important to all of us who consider ourselves environmental activists. And after that, then we're going to have a final journal reflection question. So let's go ahead and see that last video.
When the salmon left, when the lake gave out from the mountains fighting and the water drained out, the salmon left with it, and the people got Spiliai to come and take 5 people and go look for the salmon. And they went through this whole process, enduring all this suffering, loss and everything, and help from others to find the salmon. And the salmon asked them to make an agreement if they come back. The Spiliai said, those people there need you. They love you. You have to come back. He said, we'll come back because it's a great and wonderful thing to be needed and loved. Spiliai told the salmon that the people here needed them and loved them. So they agreed to come back.
Everything came in order. Everything was numbered. Everything had its place. And the salmon, as we call to it, is, when it's in the river or when it makes it all the way up into high lakes, or, it's nusuch. And that's just a general term for the salmon. When the nusuch actually present themselves, what they chan then it becomes it's a sacred food now if we're going to consume it. So because it's a sacred food, then it takes on another name, which is waikanish. But when you catch a salmon, its inside go back to the insides of the river or the lake. And so when you take care of a salmon, you put those nutrients back into the water, because all of that goes back. It's a cycle, anakanisha. And when you're taking a life like a nusuch, and turning it into a waikanish, it's to be treated with utmost respect.
The pre-dam Columbia River fishery was 15 to 20 million fish. So when our oral histories say that you could cross the river on the backs of fish, and when my mother describes the times of low water in the river, when you could cross the river on horseback or on foot, you take that low river water level or elevation and combine that with that many millions of fish coming back up the river you can easily see that the oral histories were true, that they did cross the river on the backs of salmon.
So there were so many salmon runs that came up the Columbia River, then on into the tributaries of the Columbia River. And one of the ones that is now extinct happened in the springtime. One of the names for them, and elders told us, was the Tai Chinook. And these salmon were huge. They were actually very common for them to be 5 feet long and over 120 pounds apiece. And when you think about salmon that size, that a person could walk across on the salmon backs.
The ocean was too warm for a while. That affects us. The sea line's coming up the river, the level of the water, the dam flow that stops on September 1st, you know, and it's just a lake and no flow, no fish. And, you know, we have to depend on the wind to push them up to at least sustain what we have, you know, and not let it get any worse. But that's I see as the attainable goal. What I hope for is a lot more. A lot of give and not a lot of take. So I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I still want to be able to feed my family. You know, we fish for the tribes so the tribes can have fish throughout the year.
This is one of the hardest lessons I ever did learn, was how to fish here. It took me a long time. I never did fish this way, and it's a feeling. Here in this water, like I say, your hoop will move, and whichever way it moves, it will go that way. If you turn it out like that, it'll drift out. And you turn it in, it'll come in. What a lot of people would say is science about how these fishermen fish, because it's a technique not everybody can master. You got to work on it. But I dip until I continuously start catching one fish after another, and it took me 2 years to do that. I'd go down there and I could feel them, bump them around, but I couldn't catch them. They were too fast for me, because these fish are that powerful. They can blow through these nets. And a lot of people said, no, they can't do that. 135-pound test wire, it's nothing to them. They can blow through it.
My grandpa taught me and my brother and the rest of my cousins a lot of stuff about fishing, about what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to treat the river. You're supposed to throw change in the river, like you give back to it. Our grandpa always told us to wake up early and do nets, check nets, because otherwise you're just gonna get hot in the middle of the day. Then if you do it late at night, it's gonna be windy, and you can tip your boat over, especially if it's dark.
We fished for, you know, our way over expensive shoes that we just had to have. we fished for our school clothes and extra money, and you know, playing sports wasn't cheap for our parents, and so we did that.
When I came up here and started fishing up here, I had those 4 elders on that side. I had 3 elders down this side. And since I didn't have a job, I was up here every day. I'd go sit with them and talk with them and listen to the things that they told me, you know, things that happened here, you know, with them. And that's what I hold dear to me, because I can see them in their stories. They tell me about, oh, catching a fish there or catching a fish down there. You know, a lot of stories from here all the way down to the bridge where we crossed. You know, I used to fish down there. I fished all the way up. And so I know a lot of stories. I told a lot of stories.
You look now in areas where they've had logging and clear cuts, the areas that have the salmon runs, trees come back far sooner, and the scientists went and took a look and see why. And they have found the nitrogens on top of these mountains and hills that are the same structure in the nitrogens in the salmon. And they looked into the trees and they found the DNA in the trees that come from the salmon. Salmon takes care of not only humans, it takes care of all in nature.
Mm-hmm. It's important to pray for Nusach, because its ancestors are more healthier than it's young generations today.
I hope that they get better because fishing means a lot to us. As I said, we wouldn't know what to do if we lost them. It means everything for ceremonies and name givings, and it means a lot to other families that can't fish or don't have a car to go get fish. So yeah, we give it to our grandma in Warm Springs because she don't really have a lot of people that give her fish. So me and my brother and my dad give them fish.
Yeah, one day I was up there, I saw that, and probably my 20th, 30th time I'd seen this scene before where an old hen, female salmon, I just sat down on a stump to watch this fish, the salmon. And the two bucks were already dead. There was a third one probably down below, a 3-to-1 fecundity ratio we learned in fisheries. And anyway, this hen, the mother of this red, about 10 feet long and maybe 5 feet wide, a nest where the eggs were planted that she planted, and then those three guys, 3 bucks, fertilized. Well, to her, what I thought was her last breath, when I got close to the red, she came up and tried to get in my way. No, don't. Then she dropped over and float down the river. Then she'd come back up and try to defend her nest again. Then finally, for the last time, she floated down and she didn't move. And, oh, for some reason or another, that really got to me. I cried for maybe 20 minutes, and the question really was, am I doing enough in my life? Then are we doing enough? And so, because that lady gave it everything she had, and really drives me that for a while I understood the real spirit of that fish that just died before my eyes, but her last movements were to protect her future.
They will always come back. It's up to us to keep that word. The salmon keep theirs. If you keep struggling, fighting to come back, no matter what we do to the environment to destroy their habitat and everything, they keep struggling to come back and keep their word. We write a treaty, we make an agreement, and that agreement gets broken. We didn't keep our word, so what? Those days are gone, they're past. Who cares? I see the word being kept. The agreement, between the people, Spiliai, and the salmon. That word is being kept, and it's up for us to keep that word. We fulfill our part of the agreement.
So to finish up our work tonight, we're going to take another few minutes for a final journal reflection. And our question is, everything that we've seen and heard and felt and thought tonight, how will it change your actions, your work, and your perspective? If we can each find an action that we can do, it'll give us some movement into the future. How will what we've seen and heard tonight change your actions, your work, and your perspective? Let's take a few minutes to journal about that. All right, friends, let's wrap up our journaling. And I would like to give some thanks. I'd like to thank Courtney here at Bark and Brenna, who worked at Bark also, for the trainings that they created and shared here in the spring, the radical activist trainings on national forests on stolen land. If you are here tonight and haven't watched any of these, I really encourage you to. Their recordings are available on the BARC website. I want to extend gratitude to the Confluence Project and to encourage all of us to support the Confluence Project, to give a donation to them. I also am really indebted to all of the speakers on the videos, the Indigenous people who have always lived here, who have always cared for this land, past, present, and future. People who are advocating for themselves and their communities and land and water. And I encourage everyone here to find ways that you can make meaningful, supporting Indigenous sovereignty, restoration of Indigenous land rights, and looking into how our own histories as non-Native people working in environmental activism, how we can start to unpack some of that and broaden our perspectives so that we can be advocates for Indigenous land rights. So thank you all very much for being here. I really appreciated the conversations we had in the breakout rooms, and thank you, Misha, for all of the tech. That went really well, and I hope to see lots more faces again at more BARC activities, and out in the forest, or here on the screen. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, Mia, and thanks everyone for being here. Good night.